Hey YouTube. In today's video, we will be diving into a powerful yet underappreciated NixOS feature. If you have ever struggled with different configuration file formats for your NixOS services or your desktop programs you have running on your NixOS computer, this video is for you. We will explore how we can generate common configuration file formats like YAML, TOML, or INI from our NixOS configuration. So we don't need to mess around with the details of the individual file formats. Here is what we will cover: the basics of Nix packages formatters and how they work, creating simple configuration files with proper validation, and managing multiple configuration files for more complex services. By the end of this video, you will be able to manage all of your service configuration in pure Nix and generate the appropriate files automatically. So let's jump right into it. First, let's understand what formatters are in Nix packages. Simply put, they are tools to convert Nix attribute sets into configuration files in various formats. The most common formatters you will be using are probably YAML, TOML, JSON, and INI files. And most services you deploy in a NixOS configuration use one of these formats. So let me show you a simple example of how to use all four formats. What I have done here is I have just my regular NixOS configuration, and I just have created a folder named formatters, and within that folder I created default.nix, where I import all the modules that I will create within this video. And of course, one layer above in my default.nix, I also need to import the formatters folder into my NixOS configuration. And just to show you how the formatters work, I have created a simple example file here. And up here, we initialize each formatter with packages.formats and then the format we want to use actually. And we assign it to a variable in each case. So we have YAML format, JSON format, TOML format, INI format. And down here, I have a simple example configuration structure here. And that is exactly the structure we want to write out to the individual file formats here. Here we use the generate function to generate each of the different file formats. So we pass the desired file name to the function, and we also pass the part of the configuration that we want to write out these files into the function. Then we create a derivation that will basically write out the generated files for us so we can have a look at them. And now I can just switch to my terminal and just enter nix build and then give it a path to my Nix file here. And now the files have been built, and when I scroll down here, I have a result folder here. And as you can see, I have the different file formats here. So when I disable the terminal, you can see I have a config ini, I have a config JSON, I have a config TOML, and I got a config YAML. And these files were created automatically by the formatter functions and written out to my Nix store here. Now I will just delete the result folder here because I don't need it anymore. And let's get started writing an actual Nix module here. So in my formatters folders, I will just create, let's say, YAML module.nix. And I have prepared some code for this. So first of all, we define config here, and this is just a shorthand, so we don't have to write config.services.simpleapp all the time. And here we initialize our YAML formatter and assign it to format so we can use it later on. And here we use the format generate function and give it a file name, in this case simpleapp.yaml. And we also pass in config.settings, and that's the structure from our configuration that we want to write out to the YAML file. And this is assigned to the variable config file here. And down here, we just have a regular service definition. So we have an enable option where we can say enable equals true or false. And down here we have settings. And as I said, that is a structure that we want to write out to the file. And here for convenience, we have a small description here, so everyone knows what the option is about. And for the type, we just use format.type here, that's coming from up here. And this will evaluate to YAML in this case. And down here we have the actual configuration. Just to show this, I have defined an activation script. So in case this option is enabled, the activation script will create a simple app directory in our temp folder and copy the configuration file into temp simple app and then to config.yaml. And of course, to use this, I need to go to my default.nix in my formatters and import our YAML module. In order to use this module, I need to make it part of my system configuration. So I will just go to my system configuration here and I will just paste in the service definition here. And as you can see, we have services.simpleapp and enable equals true, because if we don't enable this service, the YAML file will of course not be written. And here I have just defined some settings that I want to write to my YAML file. And now I can just save it. And as I have added new files to my Flake, I need to add them to my repo. And now I can just rebuild my system configuration. And as you can see here, the activation script has put out that the file has been generated at temp simple app config YAML. And let's have a look at this file. So here's my file content in YAML format. Now let's have a look at another example. One of the strongest features for Nix packages formatters is type validation. So with type validation, we can make sure that the values that are defined in our configuration are exactly of the type that our application needs in YAML, TOML, or whatever. So let's see how this works. Under formatters, I will just create a validated app.nix, and I have already prepared some code for this. And as you can see, this is very similar. So here we have the shorthand config for config services.validated app. Here we initialize the formatter. And here we use the format generate function and pass in the file name and config settings here and the structure we want to write out to our file here. Here we make an enable option, and here we have our settings block that we want to write to our YAML file. And for type, we use types.submodule here to create a structured type here. And we set freeform type equals to format.type, which evaluates to YAML in this case. And down here we have the options as in the other example here. And under our server option, we define a type that equals types.submodule. And this will allow us to define nested configuration options with their own validation rules. So under type submodule, I have options again here, as we had up here. And within our options, I can define the type for each option here. So for the port, we have defined the type port. And for the host, we have defined a string. And the type for workers are positive integers here in this example. And then this goes on. We also have a logging section that's besides the server section. And here we also use the type submodule here, so we can create validation rules for each of our options here within this submodule. For the level option, for example, here we define types enum and we give it a fixed list of possible values. And for the file option here, we can define that we either want a string or a null value, and we set the default to null in this case. Down here, we basically do the same as on the other file. So in case this module is enabled, we will just create an activation script that will create a validated app folder in our temp folder and copy the corresponding YAML file to this folder here. And in order to try this out, we need to go to our configuration. And of course, we need to get back to our default.nix and import the validated app.nix file and save it. And then we need to go to our system configuration here and use the module we've just created. So I would just paste this in. And as you can see, this is basically the same as on the simple app. And we call services validated app, enable it, and then do some settings. And then I can just head back to my terminal, add it to my Git repo here, and rebuild my system configuration here. And as you can see down here, we have the two outputs from the activation scripts here. Number one is for the simple app, and we also have the one for the validated app. So when I just copy this one here and put it out to my terminal, you can see that the configuration file has been written. And of course, what we can do now is we can test the validation here. So for example, I can just go to our log level here. And as you might remember, this has been defined as an enum, so it only accepts one of these four values here. And now I just set it to the value hello here. And when I try to rebuild my system configuration, you can see I get an error message. So it says a definition for option services validated app settings logging level is not of type one of debug info warn or error. This tells me that only these values are allowed in this case. And the same holds true for the other validated types we have defined in our validated app.nix here. Now let's have a look at multiple configuration files. So I will just create a new Nix file here in my formatters folder and just name it multiple files.nix. And I quickly head to my default.nix to already prepare the import. And I've also prepared some code for this one here. And as you can see, the structure again is very simple. This part we have already talked about. This one we have already talked about. This one should be also clear by now. And here we just generate three different configuration files here. And as you can see here, we have different file names, one for server, one for database, and one for logging. And we just hand over different parts of our configuration options here. So for the server.yaml, we hand over the server settings. For the database, we hand over the database setting. And for logging, we do the logging settings here. And down here, we use the run command function from Nix packages and assign it to config dir. The packages run command function will help us build a simple derivation, and we pass the name of the derivation we want to this function. And then you could pass an attribute set to make certain values available in the environment. We don't need that in this case. And then we just pass it the shell commands we want to run during build. And down here, we have our options again. So we have the enable option. As you can see here, we have different parts of settings here. So here we have our server settings, our database settings, and our logging settings. And down here we have our activation script again. And as you can see, this will create a multi-config app in our temp folder. And then it will recursively copy the config dir that is defined up here into our temp multi-config app folder here. Let's go to our NixOS configuration and actually use this module here and just paste this in. And now I head back to my terminal, add the new files to my Git repo, and rebuild my system configuration here. And as you can see down here, our multi-config app files have been generated under temp multi-config app here. And when I have a look into my multi-config app folder here, as you can see, I have all three files we have defined in our NixOS configuration. And when I have a look into one of these files, you can see that we only have the configuration options for our database in the database YAML file. So let's wrap up what we learned about configuration formatters in Nix packages. Throughout this video, we have explored different ways on how to use formatters to generate different types of config files. And we have also seen that these formatters kind of bridge the gap between your NixOS configuration and config files you need for your services and applications. So the key takeaways are, first of all, Nix formatters provide a very clean way to convert NixOS attribute sets into actual configuration files you can use for your services and your applications. And that practically means that you can write out the whole configuration in Nix code, and you don't need to mess around with YAML or other formats, and everything will be taken care of automatically. Second, we have combined the formatters with the Nix type system, and this will enable us to get powerful validation for our configuration files, so we can be sure that the values that are written out to the files are valid and usable. And as an added bonus, what we could also do is we could use this mechanism to, for example, write out configuration files we might need in a Docker container, and then we could just map the file generated by our Nix code into our container and use it within the Docker container. And this will also make it very easy to have complete system setups, including containers, and to have everything up and running just by activating your NixOS configuration. I hope this video has given you a basic understanding how you can use formatters in your NixOS configuration. I find it a very powerful and useful feature because I don't want to mess around with different file formats, and everything I have set up in my NixOS configuration will be done basically by building my system. I will link the code down in the description, and if you like content like this, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. And if you have any questions, just write them down in the comments and I will try to help as good as possible. So, see you next time. Bye bye.